sit down and discuss cases, and that's not considered misuse of protected health information because you're doing it for the good of the patient. But if you were to extend that to a group of people like you, or on my blog, who I want to present a case to them, am I helping my patient by presenting the case? Well, no. So I have to find a way to create a makeup case.
Something occurred to me. Can I ask you sort of a narrow technical question? So one thing that occurred to me about this protected information, are things like statements, are those protected information? So I kind of exist in the realm which some of the things that people say are fairly interesting. And the kind of cases you might want to present are the things that people actually say.
That's all part of that's all part. So, because when a patient comes to me, there are several things about it. A typical, we have ways, doctors can make absolutely horrible writers, but they know how to write a case. They know how to write a SOAP note. They know how, we drill this in them. They know how to write a history and physical. The first line of a history and physical is chief complaint, which is the patient's subjective statement of what's going on. And that's all part of it. You can't just, yes, that's protected. Does that answer?
Yeah, but can I follow up on that? What if it's anonymized? Because it becomes harder. You talked about the ability to identify patients from data points, but if that statement is used in an academic article, for example, and perhaps we're talking something other than the chief complaint, but with no identification of the speaker, would it still be a HIPAA problem?
And that's would it be a HIPAA problem? I'm not sure if it would be a HIPAA problem. That's when we start moving into the ethics. And when
maybe I can just address that for now. In a lot of cases where your primary goal is to do academic publishing, you're going to be covered because you're going to be operating under some kind of signed informed consent process. But actually, it does come up because I actually get frequently unsolicited emails, for example, because of the area of research that I work in, and even though I don't generally have anything to do with humans, we occasionally get hey, I found you on the internet,
right,
and I've got this problem associated. I think it's associated with my drug use. What can you do? And most of the time, it's just like, well, you can get in touch with your care provider, but a lot of times they're very illustrative, and so you might actually, particularly in casual presentations of research, want to put up a quote.
Well, and here's an area where what are your responsibilities here to the person who wrote you? Now, I have on my blog a very clear, I think, disclaimer, but just the fact that I think is clear doesn't make it clear. One, I give no advice here, right here. Confidentiality and privacy. I kind of make this clear. If you wouldn't shout it from the rooftops, don't send it to me in a poster and a comment. I won't intentionally divulge personal information, but
It's kind of impossible. The situation I described is impossible because maybe on my faculty webpage I could put something like that, but you put your email address and all the papers you publish generally. So somebody could have found you through a paper that you published.
Right.
It's not like you're going to have that kind of disclaimer like if you email.
Exactly. I think you have to. There is some burden on the part of an emailer that once they put their own shit out there, it is now if they here's a problem, and this is where it would be useful to have someone like Janet Semwell up here, is you know more than they do generally, or that's the assumption. They are putting you in the position of a professional from whom they are seeking advice, however foolish that may be. Not that you don't have advice particularly if that's good, but however foolish that may be. So do you now assume a certain responsibility, a certain custodianship of that person, a certain are you now is there some sort of relationship that's been created and now you have an ethical responsibility toward that person? I'd argue yes. I mean, I don't think that there's an absolute answer, but I'd argue, even though I say right here, I do not answer medical questions by mail ever. Don't tell me any, all this, but even though I say that, people are sick, and when people are sick, they are desperate. When people are sick, their judgment isn't great sometimes, and I still think that even though you don't have a doctor-patient relationship or a professional-patient relationship with that person, I still think you have a relationship, and I think you have an ethical duty, which is much less than an actual patient sitting in front of you, but I think it exists. Even if it's to my usual thing, when somebody sends me personal health information, the way I exercise my duties, I usually ignore the email. I usually delete it so that you don't, because as soon as you answer it, you've escalated your responsibility to that person. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
How many people have you had write to you and ask you medical?
Tons.
Really?
Yeah.
I've had 0.
I do more clinical stuff, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you get more traffic, but.
Yeah, it's interesting. You get
Mhm.
tons, so you get people just asking you, hey, should I change my Lasix dose?
No, it's almost always much more, it's much muddier than that. It's not a
Right.
question you or I would ask, it's a question,
Oh.
you and I might ask, do you think 40 a Lasix and 10 a K is better, but,
Right.
no, it's not, it's, I'm trying to think, I really should keep examples, but then I don't know if I can present them. But,
It's very proud that
Something
you're
like-
discussing.
Yeah.
no, but I think that those are, it's reasonable to keep examples like that, but I get, they tend to be more off the wall. Anybody who's going to write a random physician online who says, don't ask me questions, is going to have some issues about boundaries.
Yeah.
And I tend to get you say this, but here's my experience, don't you think that?
Uh-huh.
And shouldn't I do this and shouldn't you do that? And that I usually trash those.
Don't you think your reflexive professional stance has to do with what your profession is? So, just for example, if somebody wrote you about some kind of legal situation, yeah, you might potentially be more of an expert on some area of law because you happen to run across in your life as an
Mhm.
adult than somebody else, but you wouldn't feel any of his custodial responsibility. Similarly, Professor Munger was saying, she teaches undergraduates. Potentially, if you had an undergraduate, contact you about some undergraduate life issue, you wouldn't feel this custodial responsibility necessarily. So it depends on what your profession is in terms of
Yeah.
never being off the clock.
I have an example for you. Well,
I was gonna say, I work on a journal,
yeah.
and sometimes we get these emails from readers of the journal, and they're not sent to the author, they're just sent to the journal, and recently we got one, and it was pages of medical records.
Oh,
This
sorry.
person had a condition,
Wow.
this is a very basic science journal, and
Right.
that, it was like barely, it was totally tangential, and they're like page after page. I'm like, and 7 of us get these, get the email, and I'm just like, what are we gonna do with this?
Yeah, I mean, my tendency with stuff like that is to not respond and
Yeah.
not create that connection.
Yeah, none of us
But,
responded, but.
because then you're escalating your level of responsibility.
Yeah,
But I have in my position as an educator of physicians, young physicians coming to me for help. Either as my patient, which is fine. I mean, it's a small community and their insurance kind of requires them to stay in the system. So, or with psychological problems. And, talk about creating an awkward position for them too, because they're counting on me for evaluations. At the same time, they're asking me for assistance with their psychiatric problem or with their substance abuse problem. Being a physician changes that responsibility, but would it if I were the department chair in a microbiology department? What responsibility would I have to one of my trainees? I assume I would have some similar responsibilities. I don't know, I mean, you guys are academics, a lot of you.
You do run into that as an advisor
Yeah.
for students too, because I forget, I read this in a comment thread somewhere at some point about a student who was suffering from depression, and of course this is affecting their work, and then there's a question of how do I address this with my advisor, and as an advisor you've got to be sensitive to that as well. I can speak from experience being a student that I've suffered from clinical depression, and I was a graduate student when that was untreated.
Right.
And so my advisor knew there was stuff going on and there was something very wrong. Unfortunately, he was a very good guy and willing to put up with that and work with me.
Well, but should he have to be willing to put up with it?
Yeah,
Or, is this, once again, it's a bug or a feature question.
yeah,
Putting up with it is great,
yeah.
but does he have a responsibility to not only put up with it, but to take it into account to help improve your chances of success by guiding you
Right.
through it, and,
At least in my experience, it seems like a very fuzzy line, because,
It is, but what I would like to see is it become a less fuzzy line. And as a lot of grad school is just a zoo. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of these things, unless you get to a certain point in grad school where ethics and these kinds of things are already wrapped into what you do. You're dealing with human subjects committees and IRBs, and I don't imagine you test your physics out on people a whole lot.
Mm, try